All right. Good afternoon in the East. Good morning in the West. It is just 4 o'clock and we've just started our terrific event. We're going to give everyone just about another 30, 45 seconds to start joining us, and then we'll proceed. All right. Well, I do see we have a good number of people who have already joined us, so I think I'm going to go on and get started. My name is Nora Krayem. I'm the Vice President and Chair of the Cybersecurity, Privacy, and Digital Innovation Group at Scoyoc Associates. For those of you who are joining us today, we have a terrific panel, and we're going to have an exciting conversation talking about creating the next generation cybersecurity workforce. And as you see on the slide, we have two amazing speakers. We have Tony Coulson, who's the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Center at Cal State San Bernardino, and we have Chris Inglis, Commissioner for the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and Looker, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Cyber Studies at the U.S. Naval Academy. We'll just go one more slide. You know, we have so many things to talk about today, and you'll see is on our agenda for discussion. We're going to certainly talk about what's happening across the federal cybersecurity workforce initiatives. We are pleased to have Chris with us today to talk about all the terrific work that the Cyberspace Solarium Commission has been working on. And at the very end, we're going to crystal ball a little bit to see where does cyber workforce policy go in the Biden-elect administration. For those of you who have worked with me before, I have had the pleasure of working in 4 federal agencies and now out in the private sector, really focusing in with great people like Tony and Cal State San Bernardino and owners and operators of critical infrastructure about what to do with the cyber workforce challenges that we have. And part of what's important, I think, for the private sector and for the public sector is helping to do a better job about defining what talents are needed. What jobs do we need to fill? What goals and objectives do we need to make sure that we're hitting? And as we think about cybersecurity risk overall, you know, digital innovation and connectivity are the keys to everything right now. There's not a single person sitting at home in the middle of COVID, unfortunately, who hasn't experienced some of these issues. But for too long that I think we've had the tech excitement side, we've been rushing forward on a lot of tremendous initiatives, but we haven't paid attention about making sure that we have the right workforce to do just that. Now, the good news is, and I know that Tony and Chris and I have talked about this before in another session, there are lots and lots of reports. There are lots of executive orders. We have the White House Cyber Executive Order on Workforce, which was 13870 from May of 2019. But we also have the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Chris will talk a little bit about the commission, but I think many people have hopefully seen the report, but know that the report takes its name from the monumental task that President Eisenhower faced in 1953 when he was looking to combat the issues around Russian nuclear threats. So as we think about one of the big challenges we all have, it really is facing both federal cyber workforce issues, but just broader spectrum of training those that we need. So today, we're going to start with Dr. Tony Coulson, who's going to give us a little bit of an overview of all the great things he's been doing at Cal State San Bernardino. I also think people are well aware, but Cal State San Bernardino was just chosen and awarded NSA's Community National Center for Cybersecurity Education just a few months ago. CSUSB will establish and manage 3 centers of academic excellence across cutting-edge research on a host of other issues. And after Tony's remarks, we're going to go to Chris to hear more about the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. But then today is really going to be a conversation about how do we bring all these issues together. And then, of course, we might need a little help from Congress to get some programs funded. But I think that we're well on our way to that. So, Tony, let's start with you.
Great. Thanks, Norma. And it's great to be here with Chris and everybody out there today. It is no secret that we've been in a deficit for a long time. I've been in this space, in the workforce space for probably about 13 years now. And the reports have always been grim predictions about where we are going to be, not only for the federal workforce, but for workforce in general. And we look at those figures, and I'm sad to say that the predictions have been accurate. As much as we keep moving and moving and moving, the predictions have been accurate, that we still have not had through progressive administrations, through progressive movements of government and progressive movements in industry. We have started a lot of programs, but we still haven't been able to close this gap, which if we took CyberSeek as a benchmark, it's around a 500,000 person gap. The work that got started about 20 years ago out of NSA, later partnered with DHS, and then now has many other federal partners, of course, is the CAE program, the Centers of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity program. It's one of several workforce development programs that have been in existence for a while. And I think back to the time when I first got into the Centers of Academic Excellence, people said, well, Tony, you're in a business college. What does business have to do with cybersecurity? And I thought, what? And they said, no, this is the domain of computer science and computer engineering. Well, flash forward to today, and we're so broad in this area that it's a phrase I use and maybe overuse is we really need all hands on deck, but it's now such a broad spectrum, right? We need people in law and in public policy. We need people in healthcare. We need people with experience in criminal justice, in business administration, computer science, computer engineering, and data analytics, right? What we used to call decision sciences. We're looking at so many different domains, such a change in skills. And this is where the Centers of Academic Excellence program really fits in with some of the work that's done in the Solarium Commission, is how do we incentivize, but also how do we steer the ship to integrate cybersecurity capability into our workforce that's emerging in a lot of different fields. And so as part of the new initiatives that we have, the CAE program and working with partners in the National Science Foundation and NICE, et cetera, our community is now 335 colleges and universities strong. We're leaning into K through 12. There's a lot of great K through 12 work. There's work that's being done to partner with national centers at community colleges like the Insight Center, with the CAE community to kind of leverage the production of community colleges, but also apprenticeship programs and others. There's just a lot of facets, a lot of moving parts, all moving in the same direction. But what is evident is we've in any initiatives that the government has invested in, there's been a little bit of siloing and replication that has started to happen. And what I would like to say is, look, my colleagues at the colleges and universities, we're here to work with everybody to help solve this problem. We're here to look beyond where a program sits, but how can we get everybody rowing in the same way to concentrate on these critical skills. So today, NICE released the new framework, and it's very exciting to see because the framework leans into education and gives us some guidance, but also takes a broad look at a lot of the different elements that need to be there. We need a broad K through 12 pipeline. We need a program that transitions people from high school to workforce or to higher education, to all the way through PhD research. The PhD research is a huge concern also in this country, and that's another area that the CAE program is looking at. We have 3 communities of practice, one in research, one in cyber operations, and another one in cyber defense. All 3 areas are about not only meeting today's demands, but what is coming down the pipeline in the future. So it's really kind of a broad overview of what we're doing in cyber workforce, particularly in the CAE community of schools. But I'd like to just say this one little thing is, when was the last time you saw 335 colleges and universities working together this closely and this successfully? I mean, we really have a great program. And it's very nice to see in the commission report acknowledgement of this program. And I'm very excited to see what will be happening in the new administration and some of the ideas that are coming out of there.
Thank you, Tony. Chris?
Thanks, Norma, and thanks, Tony. I'm happy to draft on Tony's remarks. I'll talk a little bit about the context of the Solarium Commission report. I think in a moment we'll probably get into some of the details of what's recommended in there. But I think the context matters a lot. The Solarium Commission began with the premise that cyber was more than technology, and therefore we need people who know something more than simply how to manipulate technology. For what it's worth, I think broadly our definition of cyberspace is that the technology is there, to be sure, but what's equally important is that people still are the centering functions. People still are the most important piece of cyber. That's the purpose of having a domain of interest. Unfortunately, they tend to be the weakest link, but they also, on our best days, tend to be the strongest link. And then there's this third piece of doctrine, but in a plainer way of saying that, how are the roles, responsibilities, the expectations allocated across the people who actually constitute that most important piece of cyberspace? And so in taking the role of people on, you have to consider technology and doctrine, but you also have to think about the full featured approach as Tony described to people, not just the few who would have cyber in their name, but everyone who has a role to play. The second point that I would make on context is that diversity for purposes of training skills in this area is not simply something that's legally required. It's not simply the fair thing to do. It's both of those, but it's mission essential. We need people who have skills that cut across just about every discipline, every function. Sometimes they're derived through training, sometimes they're derived through education, and other times through experience, but we need all of that, and we'll discuss that more in a moment. The third point, before I get into what do you actually do to create these skills or this education, is recognize we're not all digital natives. Frankly, there are very few digital natives today. Show up at the institution where I'm fortunate enough to teach. Most folks who show up at the Naval Academy today are app natives. They're not digital natives. They really don't understand the details of how the technology underfoot or the connections or the doctrine of how that all works comes together. And therefore they live at that surface with some assumptions about what's happening underneath. Those assumptions aren't always kind of proper assumptions based upon what happens at the service. So what do we then have to work our way through? There's of course a skills piece, but there's also an opportunity piece. That's the context within which those skills make a difference. So let me walk down each of those skills. There's the expertise, which is sometimes derived through training, sometimes through education, but it's for more than the people who literally have the word cyber in their name. Oftentimes, I think the best educational or training systems are the ones that say, what do the few who have the word cyber in their name need to know? What do perhaps a great deal more people need to know that perhaps do things upon which cyber depends? Tony indicated that if you're practicing law, if you're perhaps a system engineer, if you're a computer scientist building systems that you don't think actually have a cybersecurity role, unless you build those such that they can play a cybersecurity role, then you're going to wind up being the weak link in that system. And so many have to know more about cyber than they might already believe. And then everyone, that's the all part, everyone needs to know something more about cyber than they would based upon simply their experience in living as prospective digital natives when in fact they're app natives. The second part of skills is diversity. And by that, I of course mean the demographic aspects of diversity, but I also mean the neuro kind of aspects of diversity. People who think differently, people who have different experiences, different perspectives, such that if you've got the right diverse group, somebody in the room is going to see something, say something that nobody else could see or say. And then finally, skills need to be diverse across that range that Tony described. The last aspect of skills, sometimes left kind of to something that occurs later in the process, maybe by accident, is that we need to encourage critical thinking and collaboration as a preferred behavior. Because increasingly, if you're not a critical thinker, then the overwhelming flood of information that comes your way will overwhelm you. And if you're not biased towards collaboration, you'll retreat to your stovepipe, you'll act alone. You won't have enough resources, you won't have enough skills or education to act alone successfully. You need to find out, how do I actually partner with people who are different than me, who think differently than me? The other broad aspect of this that I described was opportunity. You need to make sure that you kind of provide opportunities to everyone, maybe not the few who early on distinguish themselves in some STEM technology. but everyone. And at the age of K through 12, not when they get to perhaps college. Need to provide feedback such that they get a sense of professional fulfillment from their early experience doing things that are cyber relevant, so that that then reinforces itself and they want to do more and more and more. Need to give them experience by perhaps laying out not just an educational opportunity, but a training opportunity. But here's where you can get your hands on it, even before you have the bona fides or the technical chops to justify you being on the line. We need to create those opportunities, because far too often we find that somebody who comes out of college with even a computer science degree isn't trusted to do the work hands-on because they lack that experience. And then finally, in that box of opportunity, we need to make sure that there's agility. If you develop a skill somewhere, it should be easily transferable to another organization. The federal government is particularly bad in this regard. Sometimes a clearance, which is a requirement to do a certain kind of work, drops dead the moment you leave a given organization, and you find yourself with a kind of challenge of months to years trying to figure out how to acquire the clearance so that you can apply your skills, your cyber skills, to some new activity. It's almost worse when you talk about transitions between the private sector and the public sector and vice versa. So I'll close with this as we get into perhaps the larger conversation. The Solarium Commission, having considered all of that as that backdrop, that context, essentially has 5 broad categories of recommendations. We believe that the federal government should lead by example and therefore organize itself to essentially make all of those things I've just described not simply possible, but the probable result of how we invest in people, how we treat people, how we give context to people, how we give careers to people. We then need to recruit people into that, and not at the moment that they might have already developed on their own those skills, but have a lot of investment in those K through 12, in those pipeline activities to create a bigger pie from which everyone can recruit. Once we acquire those skills, we need to develop them. We need to make sure that we don't simply drop them in and assume that they'll find their way. We need to have programs that mentor, that train, that develop over careers length. We need to work hard to retain people. And often we find, whether it's private sector or public sector, the problem in retention is very often not the degree of change that takes place. It's maybe not even the remuneration that does or does not take place. It's that uncertainty. It's that challenge that people have of thinking about whether they matter or not. And again, feedback is going to be an answer there. And then finally, the federal government, having done those first 4 things, organize, recruit, develop, retain, has to make a contribution to the growth of the larger national proposition. Enterprise should be expected to invest in, not simply for the federal enterprise's benefit, but for the nation's benefit. For those of you that have some time on your hands, there's a really good report out there, which is an adjunct to the Solarium Commission's report. It's on the Solarium website, which is www.solarium.gov. And it's a report that's focused specifically on all the educational, all the training initiatives that the Solarium Commission would recommend. So Nora, with that as an introduction, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris, so much for that. And Tony, the two of you have teed up so many important issues for us to talk about. You know, one of the things, having worked in the government too, the stovepipes that do exist within positions, I think are very challenging for people. And so I like the way the Solarium Commission, you know, talks about the need to make sure that people understand how they fit in that greater whole. And it's the same for the private sector. I do think trying to make sure that people understand how they fit into cyber is important. And I remember just doing a cyber 101 session for HR professionals in, you know, the top 25 companies in a particular sector who didn't understand that connectivity. But before we get into some of that, Tony, as you have been working through, let's just focus on the CAE community to start with. You know, you've been talking about trying to expand the program, but trying to expand it across the federal government universe. And we don't need complete duplication across different agencies. So just talk a little bit about how does all of that work together? Because the Solarium Commission is also saying there needs to be a better kind of whole of government and how people work together in defining some of these roles.
Well, without being too politically incorrect, you know, sometimes in government, we see a lot of shiny object attraction. Right? Something shiny, that's what we need to be into. And a lot of folks, you know, in my travels are saying, well, I think we can do this and I think we can do that. But sometimes they don't take a look at what else is being done. But the Solarium Commission report says right up front, there have been a lot of reports, there's been a lot of initiatives in this, in that, right, where they're kind of competing, almost competing with each other. Now, competition's good at a certain level, but if you follow what the Solarium Commission is recommending about organizing, recruiting, develop, retain, and then stimulate growth, there's a strategic focus on it. And I think that's where the CAE program, you know, this is not a Cal State San Bernardino thing. Obviously, this is a government and then the academic partnership with many partners across the country. And I think where we have been able to excel in that program as colleges and universities is setting that example of working across the boundaries and putting things together. We're not short on ideas, but we've really developed this program into a series of phases, from ideas that come up and say, these folks should work together, to incubating those ideas. And there's been a lot of experiments given the opportunity, because that's one of the things universities often have this reputation, and colleges have this reputation of being stagnant, but oftentimes they incubate a lot of new ideas, see what works, what doesn't, and then move to, you know, action and adopting the programs and then evolving. And we've seen this great evolution. And actually, I'll just make kind of a pseudo announcement. The CAE program, the CAE community will be running a strategic planning workshop on December 15th for the members of the community. And it's one of the tenets is aligning with the strategic priorities of the Solarium Commission. And again, that naturally fits together to say, let's take down some of these stovepipes and see how we can kind of get everything together and move together.
You know, I think that's really important. And Chris, I'm going to ask you one question that before we delve into some of the specifics on the Solarium Commission. I mean, you've worked in government, right? You're out and about now. And part of what we're seeing is the good news is everyone is now excited about cyber workforce issues and programs. And the Solarium Commission, again, was very focused on how do we pull these together. But we're actually starting to see that excitement to create actually more stovepipes in different agencies. And so how, you know, this is just more from your experience. How do we bring everyone together? There's only so many taxpayer dollars, and eventually we don't want, whether it's students or the private sector, to have to be deciding between whether or not should they go to DHS, should they go to NSA, CAE. I mean, how do we improve this? What are your thoughts on that?
I think first we need to be more generous about kind of how we describe someone who works for one of us. If we describe them as a member of the larger federal cyber workforce first, and they happen to be working at the National Security Agency second, that's a really important message to them, such that they don't feel like they've somehow been disloyal by leaving NSA and going to work, say, at the Department of Homeland Security. Not that a boss wouldn't want to say, look, I'm going to compete for your time and attention. I'm going to make you love us. I'm going to make you want to work here. They should feel like they're actually managing and inspiring a larger workforce. That context, that culture matters more than anything else. But at the time, it's not just the culture that we have as a boundary, it's that the procedures, the requirements are literally different. I spoke earlier about the clearance requirements are different. If you have a top secret from one organization, it's not necessarily a top secret from another organization. If you live in a GS, general services scale in one organization, which has certain flexibility, certain hiring flexibility, perhaps a premium given to cyber skills, that doesn't exist broadly across all organizations. So you need to fix those mechanical issues. You then can fix the cultural issues. And then when any of us recruit somebody to the cyber workforce, that's a benefit to all of us in the longer term.
Yes, so I would say from your mouth to every agency and congressional committees of jurisdiction's ear. But I do think, you know, the work that you're doing, and Tony, as you across the CAE community, I think that that's helping. One of the things that you both talk a lot about, and I do think is very important, and is mentioned in the Solarium Commission report, is committing to recruiting beyond conventional pathways into government. And that means there are a lot of different ways to do that. Chris, I'm going to start with you. You know, what if you were to tell people the top 3 things they need to know about what this means and how to help? Because I think we have people who are listening today who want to further that goal. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think a number of organizations have recognized this. I've heard Tony speak of this. I've heard IBM speak of this. I know NSA has spoken of this, is that even when you're recruiting for specific cyber skills, that's not one and the same as coming from the world of computer science. Oftentimes you find that the people you need don't actually need a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, or let alone a Master of Science in Computer Science. But so many cyber job descriptions start there. And so you need to think more broadly about what are the discrete, tangible skills. Oftentimes it's just a good critical thinker, somebody that actually can thrive, survive, prosper in a very complicated world that includes policy and technology and perhaps some kind of coordination or collaboration with others. So think about those skills, break it down into the atomic elements, and then recruit for those skills. And you'll find then that the sources could be, I don't want to diminish the value of this, but you can say, look, if you've got a GED and you've got some hands-on experience, then I'll take you the rest of the way. I will hire for attitude and I will train for your skills. And so the Solarium Commission recommended a number of those, which are illustrative. So work-based learning programs that offer apprenticeships, K through 12 curricula, which generate, early on interest, and then those kids tend to find their way into these programs. Cybersecurity clinics that marry themselves to the education pipelines to provide the experience so that people can begin to distinguish themselves at the moment that they arrive with whatever technical chops that they might have. Tony has spoken about the kind of the Centers for Academic Excellence, which can be a menu as opposed to some perhaps single formula for how you develop these skills. That's diversity in and of itself. Putting cybersecurity into safety curricula that many companies have for various trades and disciplines. All of that illustratively begins to say, maybe we should think very broadly about how we populate pepper, right, the world with all of these skills coming from any source, because everyone's going to have a role to play in cyber.
And that's a really important point that I know I try and, as we all say, there's the cyber geek world and we understand it, and we're trying to help make sure that everyone else understands it. But trying to socialize where cyber fits, and safety, I think, is really important. And as we think about different sectors on the private sector side, they have different needs as well. But trying to make sure that people understand this is not that hard to understand. It does fit, right? If we're talking about reliability or safety or other things in delivery of service, I think that that's important. And Tony, we talked very briefly at the beginning of this event. Today is an auspicious day. We do have the new NICE framework that came out, and it talks about focusing on competencies, specific roles and responsibilities, as we all know, and Chris alluded to. But so Tony, talk a little bit about, those issues, and then how you look at them across, both what you do at Cal State San Bernardino, but also in the CAA world.
Well, yeah. I think one of the biggest additions in the framework is the acknowledgement of competency. I think that is a key. And and to Chris's point, it's creative, people having a certain degree of creativity, entrepreneurship, or resourcefulness, right? People that have that kind of a spirit or an attitude about them. But I think that the new framework takes knowledge, skills, and abilities and moves it to knowledge, skills, and focuses on the tasks that need to be completed. If you want to be a blah, you should be able to do a blah.
Right.
And the competencies, grouping it together is very important. A while back, Cal State San Bernardino created a system in conjunction with DHS at first, and then also NIST and NSA, called the NICE Challenge, which is a free cyber range. And way back when they started it 6 years ago, Dr. Nestler, who runs the program, said, we're not going to look at categories, we're going to look at tasks. We're going to start with the tasks. What is it? What's the workforce experience before the workforce? And I don't care what your background is, can you come in and can you do this? And does it line up with what not only the federal, but also employers are looking for in that area of competency? Do they have the ability? And out of that has just grown there's a lot of different programs like this, but out of that has grown as Chris has said, look, you could have a GED and a lot of experience. We're starting to see people saying, I'd like to do those NICE challenges, but I'm a high school. and we want to use it in our high school, or we want to use it in another area that it really wasn't originally set forth. That wasn't really in our mission space, but it's showing people have a thirst to show what they can do, really what they can do. And I think that is an important part in how we're going to solve this problem, is a diversity of skill, a diversity of approaches, educational approaches. When I first started years ago in this space, people would come up and say, you know what we need? We need cyber ninjas. And if I heard cyber ninja one more time, I think I was going to just freak out, because a ninja is also is great. It's very flexible, dynamic. It has its attributes. But when we go into a war, you also need the people that are running logistics in the background, that are feeding the troops, that are making sure everything is moved. The whole supply chain has to move. And cybersecurity is like that. There's an entire supply chain that has to be fed. The ninjas and the soldiers are going to fight the war, but we need to build all those other pieces or it won't work. It just won't work. And again, the CAE program has shown itself to be very dynamic, is moving into the K through 12 space, is working into workforce pilot programs. There's the new Cyber Education Diversity Initiative, which is looking into minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges, and then a whole bunch on faculty development, making sure we have trainers. It's really a holistic approach to solving this problem, but that's what we need. We need, big thinking, big ideas, and again, knock down those walls and really concentrate on what it is that we need, which isn't just one thing.
Right, that's right. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a cyber ninja. That just sounds—
There's nothing wrong with that, no.
And exciting, and we can incent people. But, Chris, as we talk about the broader incentives, you mentioned, and it's in the report, focusing on apprenticeships, promoting cooperative study and expanding training programs that can connect. People do need to see that there is a career trajectory and how it works. So talk a little bit more about that, because I thought the Solarium Commission did a tremendous job, focusing on the different sort of paths and tools that people can see. It makes it a lot easier for a lot of folks, especially as you said, sometimes you just have a GED and that works perfectly fine. So we don't want to scare people away.
Yeah, so I think that all lines up against you need to do two things to support this this larger program that we've been talking about. The first is to expand the interest on the part of people who could enter the pipeline but might not otherwise enter it because they don't see themselves as cyber ninjas. They don't see themselves as computer scientists. You need to appeal to them to say, no, you could still make a difference. You might make a greater difference. And maybe one day the ninjas will work for you, right? So that's not an unfair appeal. So you need to make sure that you've done that. And two, once you've hooked their interest, you need to give them a pathway. There are a number of programs that we highlight in the Cyberspace Solarium report that are undertaken by a number of institutions, many of which are federal in nature. I'll just mention one. The Cyber Corps for Service, Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service, 75 graduates a year. What that is you invest in their education. So you find somebody that's got that interest, hopefully stimulated across the broad front, where you're creating diversity based upon that stimulation. About 275 times a year, we're able to say, we'd like to bring you into a training program. And at the end of that, all we expect is that you'll then go to work somewhere in the government enterprise for a period of, I think it's 2 years, but you'll go to work for us. And our bet is that having hooked you kind of not simply on the skills, but on the feedback that comes from that work, you'll stay in this business. And if we're true to what we talked about earlier, which is we believe that you're a resource for the nation, then after those 2 years, so long as you stay somewhere in that system, we're great, we're good. We want to expand that greatly. We want to take that from 275 a year to 2,000 a year. Now, the program managers for that program probably right now are panicking, saying, oh my goodness, how could we possibly do that? We'll do that incrementally. We'll do that with a sense of urgency. But I think that program, again, illustratively, it's not the only one, but the significance of that is create the kind of the appetite, create the opportunity, kind of drag those people along by kind of putting wind in their sails. They'll find their way beyond that.
That's right. Well, you touched on one issue that I know is near and dear to Tony's hearts. Well, it all is. But Tony, talk a little bit about the work on CyberCore and the SFS scholars that you've been doing.
That program is a game changer in so many different ways. It's absolutely, I call it, this is cybersecurity for the masses, not the classes, okay? Taking people and saying, look, you are smart and we want to invest in you if you're willing to serve. And it's just been a phenomenal, transformative program at my university in particular. And I remember the very beginning to where we are now, where we've produced hundreds of students, and each one of them seems to have a unique story. People that you wouldn't necessarily predict were on a trajectory. And I think that's another piece of this puzzle. When we look at apprenticeship programs and we look at K through 12 pipelines and the Gen Cyber Camps that NSA has been and NSF have been sponsoring, along with the CyberCore program, the DoD SciSP program, all of these things, put in the right hands and identifying the talent. And oftentimes it's somebody who doesn't know how smart they really are. And getting them a chance to discover how smart they are and give them opportunity and say, you can do this. I tell you, my most gratifying experience with those programs is when students go away to their internship, they come back like they went away children and they come back and they're, you know, adults. They're amazing. They're suddenly like, I can do this. I really can do this. And they were given an opportunity. Now I could do a whole 2 hours on stories about, you know, students that started in point A and are now in the stratosphere, but I'll just give you one quick one. One of the authors of the new NICE framework, Danielle Santos, she's one of ours. And it just shows, you know, started at Cal State, you know, undergraduate student, and now is helping set national policy. These programs are enablers. And I think that's also where it ties to diversity. It's not only diversity of skill, it's not only diversity of ethnicity, but it's diversity of skill. It's diversity of populations, of how we get people in and give them opportunity to show off and do things. So investments in programs like that are extraordinarily important and transformative, not only to the student, but to the institutions in which they're based.
That's right. Well, I know it's always amazing how quickly this conversation goes, and we have about 10 to 15 minutes left. But before we do questions, I do want to talk about the K through 12 piece of this. This is one of the most fascinating things to me, and it is so important to start, you know, early on, both with kids in the, you know, getting them engaged across the board, as we've talked about. But I think there are two issues. You know, one, Chris, I'm going to start with you, and then Tony, I'll go to you. Let's talk about, you know, how do we actually make this change in the K through 12 process? Because it's good to talk about, but I think it's harder in implementation when we think about the traditional teachers that we have in the K through 12 world and what they're used to teaching. So, Chris, talk a little bit about that and what you think.
So I think you said two issues. Hopefully I'll line up against the right two issues here, but I think in K through 12, there are two issues from my view. The first is that we don't have enough curricula such that if a teacher was willing and kind of, you know, had the kind of the attitude, right, they wouldn't know what to teach. They wouldn't know what to say. Right. And that doesn't need to be recreated school by school, state by state, system by system. We actually can create that and give that to them. That's a specific recommendation in the Solarium report. We're not alone. I think that that's a recommendation that's been out there for quite some time. We need to do that. The second is the teachers themselves. We often think we need to have a cyber kind of qualified, trained teacher to do that. We already have great teachers. They're just not kind of competent in cyber. So let's train them to kind of take the skills they already have. They know how to deal with K through 12 students. They know how to teach. They know how to imbue them with passion, enthusiasm. Let's just give them that little bit more. Said, here's how you be cyber competent yourself as a teacher, right? So let's address the all part of that, not the special few, because we're not going to have enough people who are dedicated only to cyber. Again, the Solarium Commission recommends that we have workshops and ways that we can take all those teachers, right, who would say, look, I want to teach that as a component of the larger curriculum so that we can then greatly increase the opportunities that are placed in front of our K through 12 kids so that they then show up in the pipelines that Tony and I have talked about earlier.
Right. Tony?
K through 12 is near and dear to my heart, but to Chris's point, exactly. Years ago, we took part in an exercise in California, and we said, what should we do with cyber? How can we integrate it into what we call the A through G curriculum? So it's not an elective, but it's integrated. We created some course templates. One was called We the People, which was integrating cybersecurity issues into public policy and government course that is already there. Same with integrating it into physics. We have amazing programs that are happening in the new CAE grants that NSA just came out with. We have a K through 12, an examination of a K through 12 CAE program. Maybe we can create something along those lines. And kind of a redesign of the Gen Cyber program, and also another one with Moraine Valley and University of Alabama, Huntsville, called the Ring Project, which has some amazing opportunities in there. Again, taking kind of holistically, how do we develop teachers in some way, but also curricula? How do we get the resources, but also make sure that everything is appropriate, and it can be done with small little bits, right? It doesn't have to be, you must create a new course that has to be taught, because I think that is problematic in high schools across the country. As soon as you say something must be taught, they have to take something else away. It's not like they're sitting on spare time in the curriculum. And so we're looking strategically, and then also we're looking at how many of these kids are going to go to colleges, universities, or regional ROP type programs or CTE programs. How can we make sure there's a path for everyone? And I think that's where the CAE program, in its idea, incubation, action type of model, has done extraordinarily well. And it supports the goals of the Solarium Commission.
Well, as a final wrap-up question, and then we'll see if I can sneak in, we do have just a few questions in the chat. We do have an amazing new opportunity, which is a new administration coming in. And while they're new, these are not brand new players to either national security, cybersecurity, or higher education or education issues. The president's married to someone in the president-elect, is married to someone in the education community. And these are all things that we expect that the Biden-Harris team will be very focused on. So if you could each give the Biden-Harris team some unofficial guidance right now on the first, you can only pick two things, what would you want them to do early on? Chris?
I'll go back to my early remarks, which is that if cyber is the meld of technology and people and doctrine, let's focus on the people right up front. Let's make sure that we've got the talent, and let's do this in the way that we've described here, which is that we need all skills, all talents, all perspectives. And I think there would be three metrics that I would say that they ought to focus on. At the end of this pipeline, they of course have to focus on the bottom line, and we're going to make our numbers. We're going to get the 500,000 people who need to do the cyber work. And within that, are they properly diverse, not just demographically, but in their neurodiversity and in the various disciplines. But really important, I'd focus on the front of that pipeline to say, does every child somewhere between K through 12 on multiple occasions, at least one, but on multiple occasions, get exposed, get some opportunity to see cyber as an opportunity for them? Today, the statistics say that somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of those kids are exposed to cyber in some way, shape, or form, meaning all the rest are not. Let's make that 100%. And then the third is, let's focus on behavior. Let's make sure that we imbue our children with critical thinking skills, collaboration skills, because we actually demonstrate those ourselves. That's not a political statement, that's just an educator statement, but also because we think that that's the necessary foundation and fabric of society. If they focus on those three things, Silicon Valley and all manner of other activities will focus on the technology, and the roles, responsibilities that are the third part of that doctrine, that'll take care of itself.
Okay, Tony?
I agree absolutely with what Chris said and how he outlined that. I think it really comes down to looking at education from the perspective of not a factory where we're trying to spit people out, but also to create what has made America great so far, which is that America is a nation that reinvents itself, constantly reinventing. As industries expire and die, new ones come up, and we keep moving forward. And I think that as long as the strategy, again, along the metrics that Chris described, keeps focusing on moving forward and looking out and seeing the great work that is being done, not only from a federal level, but also at the state and the local level. There's a lot of great exemplars of what can be done out there.
That's right. Well, I'll just say this, we are on our last minute, and we've been talking about the people side of this. Here's my, I only have time for one recommendation. I would really like the incoming administration to do all the things that this team has talked about, but to also focus on how cybersecurity fits, at least for purposes of the private sector, in each and every one of our critical infrastructure sectors. We are still having too many problems of stovepipes within sectors who either are arguing that they're not critical infrastructure, or who are not fully integrating cybersecurity across the spectrum. Autonomous vehicles is a great example. These are things where we think about artificial intelligence or quantum, like full integration and where cyber fits. Because I think if you can get people excited about cyber in different sectors, people will see maybe what the new trajectory is. So we want the best and the brightest of the talent pool here in the United States. And so Tony and Chris, I know you will continue to do that each and every day and all that you're doing. And I will do all that I can from my vantage point. And so I will say thank you to everyone who joined us today and actually stayed with us for the people at the beginning. I know we didn't get to all the questions as well, but we'll look forward to having this conversation in other venues together. So thank you for joining me today. And thank you for all of you for staying with us today as well. Stay safe. Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.